Good morning. I'm Suzette Martinez-Standring, your host for It's All Right with Suzette, a half-hour show about authors and their works. And today we have a great guest. I have humor author and poet John Branning, who is beaming in from Maine, where he lives, to talk about his newest book, The Best I Can Do, a panoply of humorous essays and light verse, which came out in 2022. It won first place for humor through the Next Generation Indie Book Awards. John Branning is the author of 6 books, which are 3 collections of short humorous essays, along with 3 collections of light verse that offer a wry approach to the dicey subject of politics. He's lovable. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Suzette. I'm so thrilled to be here today. I'm so excited. My Fitbit just started to buzz. My heart rate is already climbing. So,
Oh, I love it. I love it. I'm so glad to have you. Now, John, you're so modest. You wrote to me, it made me laugh when you said your writings have left literally millions of readers with no idea of whom you are. But that's not true.
well, I try to base it in fact.
Well, let's brag on some of your past recognition as an author. Tell me
Well, let's
about
see.
your some of that.
Sure, certainly. So the 3 books of humorous essays that I've done have all been collections of things that I've posted from my blog, which I think we'll probably chat a little bit more about later. The first book that went out was actually named one of the best self-published books of 2016, which was quite a year. And that was through the Huffington Post. So I was very thrilled to learn that. It was the only humor book that they listed in that. So that was quite a thrill. And then in November of 2022, I was very pleased and surprised to be named the Humor Writer of the Month by the Irma Bombeck Writers Workshop, which I had, been following and been associated with for a period of time. And the notice came from their executive director, Terry Rivsey, who I think you and I both know pretty well. So that was quite a thrill because there really have been some big names in comedy that have shown up on that list. So
Fantastic, John. Fantastic. Well worth reading. I'm always so entertained by your books. Now, your latest collection, The Best I Can Do, was a winner in the humor category for the Next Generation Indie Book Awards. Tell us what inspired you to write this book.
Well, Suzette, what inspired me to write the book is that I believe that every day that passes that I can't think of something that's funny about it is a day wasted. And that's what led me to start a blog, close to 2 decades ago. And this book in particular, I felt like it had been a number of years since I had started writing humor. And I just sort of wanted to pull together my, greatest hits. As you can see, I think on the screen, your audience will be able to see the cover of the book. And you can see the best that I can do is not necessarily up to code in some instances. But I really wanted to kind of pull together a summary of what I had been doing. And also in the course of the time since I had started to write, besides just doing some of the shorter humor pieces, I branched out into light verse a little bit and I branched out into politics a little bit. So I just wanted to get all of that sort of in one collection.
Now, when you were writing, sometimes writers have a specific audience in mind. Did you have an audience, a specific audience in mind, or what was your goal for the readers?
Yeah, I definitely the audience I had in mind were living people who had money, who could purchase the book and then potentially even read it as well. Um, my take on the things that I read, and you were very kind to call me modest up front. I do things and I screw them up. The first collection that I put out, I called the selfie facing, not self-effacing, but selfie, like when you take a picture with the camera, because I realized that most of the time, whatever it is I try to accomplish, whether it was work when I was working, when I first started to write, or being a husband and a father, or being a homeowner, I screw things up all the time. And I think that other people tend to do that too, but they get more enjoyment hearing somebody else screw up and it makes them feel better about themselves. So I thought that that was part of the reason why I would, try to reach those people and let them know.
I think that's wonderful because humor is so healing on so many levels. And when you're self-effacing and you can admit that you've screwed things up in a very funny way, it's so engaging. Now, three of your collections were written in light verse. Tell me why that format appeals to you.
That's a great question. And, again, the majority, although not all of it, but the vast majority of it has to do with politics. And, I won't get into a political discussion with you, but I was trying to express my take on politics and what I thought was concerning to me, but to put a humorous spin on it. But there are so many wonderful political humorists that I felt I couldn't compete with them. And I've always had a little knack for writing, in birthday cards, anniversary cards, whatever, little poems for people. And I've kept it up over the years. And so something just came to me. It was back in the, Clinton Trump era. Something about that debate that they had, that kind of infamous debate where he stalked her on the stage, just took me in a way, and a poem just came out of me. And I didn't touch poetry and politics again for a few months, but then it came up again. And every time I wanted to write about something political, the way that it struck me to be funny about it, but also convey some of what I was feeling, was through rhyme. And so that's what I've done. And, again, one of the beauties of doing it in the current era is that we have a leader who makes some interesting choices in speech patterns. So I very often try to capture pretty much verbatim what that individual may have said and fit it into a rhyme scheme.
So clever, John. In fact, let's give the viewers a taste of your writing. I feel that, excerpts really help the listener understand your style and the entertainment value of it all. So do you have something that you'd like to share with us today?
Why, Suzette, I just happen to have a selection picked out in my book, which now disappears because I'm, an ectoplasmic morph on your screen. So this is not political. This is a humorous thing, but it was based on something that actually happened. It's called Climb Every Mantra, and it was about my one and pretty much only attempt at performing yoga. Carol, who's my wife, asked me the other day if I'd be interested in going to Kol Nidre with her that evening. I was confused by her request because, one, it wasn't anywhere near Yom Kippur, and two, Carol isn't Jewish. When I asked her to clarify the reason behind her inquiry, she said it would help us to learn to focus and relax. Now I was completely flummoxed, so I turned down the TV, pulled out my earphones, stopped scrolling through Facebook on my phone, and stepped off the treadmill. What exactly is it you want to do tonight? Once I was paying closer attention, I understood she was asking if I wanted to go to Yoga Nidra with her. Ah, okay. To the untrained ear, Aramaic and Sanskrit sound an awful lot alike. I was forced to admit that I knew as much about Yoga Nidra as Carol knew about Kol Nidre, so I asked her to provide a brief explanation. She said it was a method of achieving deep relaxation, getting mind and body into a state of consciousness between waking and sleeping. I said I wasn't sure why this was something that required practice, since that's how I spend most of my days. She went on to clarify that the focus was more on achieving a wakeful state while still being very relaxed. And when one reaches such a condition, the body rejuvenates and the mind opens to profound thoughts. I said I wasn't sure this was all that different from attending Yom Kippur services, which also cultivated drowsiness while requiring you to remain attentive. Carol said the two were nothing alike and suggested once the Yoga Nidra session was done, we could go out to eat. I said she was further proving my point. The highlight of the Day of Atonement is the meal when it's all over. But because I am open to new experiences, and also because Carol gave me that look, I agreed to go with her. Once we arrived at the yoga studio, I had to sign a release. Release from what, was my question. I had to agree I wouldn't hold the business liable for any injury that might occur during the session. I asked what kind of injury could possibly be inflicted while trying to achieve a state of deep relaxation while stretched out prone on a mat at floor level, unless I somehow managed to be lulled into an irreversible coma. Again, Carol gave me that look, and I acquiesced and signed the paperwork. We ditched our shoes, and I dropped my attitude. This was a popular program. There must have been at least 60 people in the room. I wondered how anyone could achieve a state of deep relaxation in such a crowded and closed space. I thought perhaps the tight quarters combined with deep breathing would lead to elevated levels of CO2, and therefore people were confusing profound insights with hallucinations brought on by oxygen deprivation. Now I was understanding why I had to sign that release. The session got underway with several basic yoga poses focused on gentle stretching and alignment, which caused me to break into a sweat while fighting off foot cramps. About 15 minutes in, we began to work on our state of consciousness. We lay still while listening to our instructor, a very knowledgeable and charming woman named Sajal, review the 7 chocolates. There are 7 kinds of chocolate. Let's see, there's Snickers, Three Musketeers, Twix, Kit Kat, Mounds, Almond Joy. I was drawing a blank on the last one. I whispered to Carol on my left to ask if she knew, and she replied we were supposed to be focusing on the 7 chakras. Well, Jesus, I could relax or I could focus on chakras, but how could I possibly do both at the same time? I don't recall the specifics of the 7 chakras because, in all honesty, by that point, I was craving something sweet. Once we were done with the chakras, Sajal had us direct our focus on individual parts of the body, sections of the arm, the leg, the torso, head, and neck. She named every appendage by name except for the tingly parts. Next came instruction to focus on the breath flowing through each nostril individually. I could pick out the left, I don't mean pick that way, but I couldn't manage to isolate the right. Left breathing is supposed to lower your blood pressure, while right breathing raises it back up. The risk of lapsing into a coma was inching closer to reality. Since the class had people ranging from novice to expert, Sajal said we should each do whatever we felt was necessary to relax. So I got up and dashed into the pub next door for a quick beer. I would have slipped back into my spot unnoticed, except for belching as I resumed my Savasana pose. We completed the session after another 30 minutes. Sajal then guided our return to a normal state of awareness. Well, except for the woman who was on my right. She was sleeping like a baby. I kneeled down, gently putting a hand on her shoulder while leaning in close to her ear to say, "Wake up, it's over." Everyone rolled up their yoga mats, refolded blankets, returned blocks to storage, and exuded a sense of calm and well-being. I have to admit, I enjoyed the session more than I thought I would, finding it very peaceful. I felt more centered than when I arrived, and actually had an insight unearthed from deep in my subconscious, which helped me resolve an issue that had been preying on my mind for much of the evening. The 7th chocolate is a Milky Way. Namaste.
Oh, John, that's so entertaining. I really appreciate that. Now, before we take the break, what other topics are included in your newest book, The Best I Can Do?
Well, something I like to do when I get stuck is I take lists or aphorisms or mottos that are almost cliche ridden, like the posters that you see in the workplace, for achievement and excellence. And then I have a response to them, and I have a whole bunch of those in the book, probably too many. And it's an easy way for me to sort of kind of get my comedy muscles rolling sometimes. So I love to do that. I love to write about grammar, mostly because my own grammar is so abysmal. And the rules of grammar, particularly in the English language, are so incredibly difficult to master. I love to read about it, and I love to read about the different parts of speech, and I can never keep them straight, and I can't tense my verbs correctly or anything, but I'll write about that. And then it's the usual stuff. When I worked, it was about, what was inane in the workplace, and when being married for 40, how many years now? Uh-oh, let's edit this part out, Suzette.
I know
Coming up on,
you.
coming up on 44 years, I think, this year.
Well, John,
There's
fantastic.
a lot going on there, so.
Well, before we take a break, I just want to tell our viewers that it's John Branning, author of The Best I Can Do. And in a few moments, we'll be returning to talk to him about his writing process and his experiences with self-publishing. So stay tuned, stay with us. We'll be back in a moment. And we're back with John Branning, and I'm really interested in your writing process, John, because everybody has a different biorhythm, a particular day, whether a time of day when they write, how I know for myself, bribes are heavily involved in my own writing process. So you wrote that you live on a lake in central Maine with your wife, Carol, your cat, Penny, son, Josh, and another cat named Lucy, where you say you are distracted from your writing by the views outside your window. I can only imagine. So, describe for us your writing process.
So my writing process is pretty straightforward. I try to get a moment of quiet in the house, and they are few and far between. Our son, who's an adult, has lived with us for several years, mostly, starting with pandemic and moving on from there. But before he came, the house was pretty quiet. It was just Carol and me and a bunch of cats. I retired before she did, so I used to have full days where I could just focus on what I wanted to do and let my mind open up. But now I have to pick my moments. So I've become an early riser. I find, it's the quietest part of the day. It's an easy time to look outside. And even though it's somewhat of a distraction as it is today, because it's a beautiful day up here, it's just inspiring to be able to see the beauty of the water and the birds that we attract and the squirrels that run through the yard. And it just gets me into a nice kind of quiet, centered place that I can then just direct my mind on whatever's caught my attention that particular day.
And you say you're an early riser and you get started with your writing. Do you, when you're coming up with a new idea, is your style to just put anything and everything on a page, as Annie Lamott would describe as a shitty first draft? Or do you feel that you edit carefully as you go along? How do you view that?
I think I used to when I first started to write, I think I would stop and go back and edit. I think now that I've, learned more about how to be a better writer and and Lamont is, the quintessential example of this. I just let it go. The only challenge I have sometimes, particularly in doing the verse, is I'll come up with a line or a phrase or capture some of that dialogue, as I mentioned before, which is just so perfect, just has absolutely the right meter and foot to it, and it ends on a particular word, like kofefi, and then I have to come up with a rhyme for Kofefi. So, that takes a little bit of research, or whatever the twist of the phrase is, or whatever point I'm trying to make. I have a line that sounds beautifully, and now, of course, being very strict with trying to make the rhyme scheme work, I stop and I look, and then sometimes I say, well, this word is better, so maybe I can go back and what's an alternate, what's something from the thesaurus for that. But yeah, otherwise than that, I just let it rip. I just open myself up to it and just let it go.
Kofefi, yeah, that is quite the challenge. I come up with jefe, which means chief or boss man in Spanish.
Now, if I move into bilingual, I'll
Now,
write that one
tell
down.
me, what are some of your comedic influences, John?
Oh, there's many. First and foremost, I guess, as a kid, I remember reading Irma Bombeck in the paper every week. I've always loved Irma Bombeck, and didn't know that there was the writers' workshop until I was, many years into my writing, and so happy that I stumbled across that organization and those beautiful workshops that they put on. I've always been a big Dave Barry fan. Embarrassed myself once when I first got onto Twitter by tagging him in a post and asking him to send me the name of his agent because I was just as funny as he was and didn't get a response. I love David Sedaris. I love his writing. I like him in particular because his pieces are lengthier. I tend to write a little longer than, would be good for, say, a newspaper column or a syndicated column. There's usually, and as you well know, they're usually pretty tight word limits on those, and I tend to be a little more verbose. But he gets to write at great length, particularly what he publishes in the New Yorker. And there's others too. There's Max Apple, who wrote a great book of short stories that I read many, many times years ago called Free Agents. Tom Peretta, who wrote the Leftovers. But he's had a couple of collections of short stories, one in particular, Bad Haircut, which is just my all-time favorite. And Fran Lebowitz, who is inspiring because I've heard writer's block for, several decades. So when I get stuck, I say, well, it's not as bad as Fran Lebowitz. So
Well, John, I know that nowadays self-publishing has leveled the playing field. And I know that everyone, aspiring writers are always really interested on what direction to take. Self-publishing apparently has been pretty successful for you. First of all, can you talk about how you came to choose that method of publication and maybe about your experiences with it?
Sure, absolutely. So when I first decided to put together a collection of, blog posts back in 2016, that first book, I shopped it around. I, got online and, did all my research about how to write the query letter and get in touch with agents. And I fortunately got some responses back from people, but, it didn't go anywhere. And I felt like, well, gee, I just want to get what I have out there. I want to try to reach a wider audience. And, at that time, self-publishing was really taking off. It was very, I don't know if easy is the right word, but it was not a barrier to getting your own material out there. So I thought, why wouldn't I try to do this and see how it goes? It was a great learning experience to navigate through putting a book together via the Kindle platform, with Amazon, which, I don't push on Amazon as much now, again, for political reasons, but it was the avenue to be able to do it. I was very pleased with the outcome of the product. And, when I decided it was time to do a second book a few years later, again, I made the outreach and didn't quite get the response I wanted. And I thought, why should I prevent myself from reaching out to the public just because everybody who writes, who writes for, whether it's for a living or rather, for an avocation, they want their publications to be successful. They want to make some money at it. I just want to try to bring, whatever I can in terms of some joy out to folks. Nothing has ever been a big seller, but it's been well received. You've always been kind and complimentary. People that I don't even know that that are not friends and family, somehow a book has gotten to them, and they've said, you really made me laugh, and that just fills my heart with joy.
That's fantastic. And, nowadays, I think that a lot of inexperienced people think that when you sign up with any kind of publication company, that somehow they're going to set things up for you and do a lot of PR outreach. And
Yeah.
time and again, we find that's not necessarily true. Can you talk about your PR outreach and just a few things that you have found very, very helpful for you getting your book out?
Sure. So obviously, social media, love it or hate it, it's there. So it's something that one needs to embrace. Um, I, reached out to local libraries to do readings at libraries. I've reached out to independent booksellers to do readings at bookstores. The last reading that I had set up, there's a beautiful little town in Maine called Norway, Maine, about an hour from my house. And I reached out to the owner of that store, and he invited me to come in and do a reading. And it was, I think it was just about a year ago now. It was a year ago in March, and it was a blisteringly cold day, and hardly anybody was out in the downtown. And the people who came in, I was sitting at a nice little table with candy, and nobody bought the books. And I had a very lengthy conversation with one woman, and she asked me many questions, just like you are. And at the end of it, when I thought I had sealed the deal, she said, well, I am into goth porn, which I had never heard of. And I said, well, if that's a lucrative avenue, I might consider it. Uh, but she just turned and walked away. So, but yeah, I mean, it's just outreach. It's posting often. It's doing workshops. One other name that I'll drop just in terms of, a wonderful resource for people that are trying to investigate what to do is Jane Friedman, who I think you and I both know, who's just put out the second edition of her book, The Business of Being a Writer. She's wonderful, and I've taken a workshop of hers in person in Boston, which opened my eyes to a lot of things that I needed to do. So I'm fortunate to have the time to pursue it.
Fantastic, John. And in just we just have a few minutes left. First of all, tell us how to get a hold of you, your website, where your books are sold, and what's next for you as an author.
So I have two websites. One is johnbranning.com. You see my name spelled out there. Put a dot and a com after it, and you'll be there. There's a link on that website to another website, which is where the political stuff goes. So if anybody's interested in the political stuff, that is called Trump in Verse, all one word, trumpinverse.com. And there's political poems, and they're neatly organized by first campaign and term, the years away from office, and second campaign term. So you can pick your time period that you want to look into. Um, and then, my books are available on Amazon. Again, I don't push Amazon as the first, but it's obviously pretty big. Another place that I think is great to shop at is um, book is it bookstore.org or bookshop.org? I think it's bookstore.org. And they have their prices are very competitive, and a certain percentage of the sales through them, they donate back to independent bookstores in communities. So I recommend them as well. But any bookseller, I'm on the platform that allows any bookseller to order it at any time. So go to your favorite hometown bookstore and ask for me by name, and they'll get it for you.
And what's next? We probably have like about 2 or 3 minutes left. And what is next for you as an author, John?
So next for me as an author, there's a couple of goals that I have. Number one is I do want to more regularly appear in publications. That was one of the great pieces of advice that I got from Jane Friedman, to really sort of market myself more in terms of getting published. And I've been working on that, excuse me, quite a bit over the course of the last year. I don't want to put out another collection necessarily. I find that I'm not writing as many pieces like what I read during our program here today, because in retirement, things just go by a little bit slower than they used to. I don't have as much, crazy. Here's the crazy thing that happened to me today. It's like it's the same thing that happened to me yesterday and the day before and the day before that. Um, so I want to do that. What I'd love to do, and again, I mentioned the Bad Haircut book by Tom Perrotta. That's a collection of stories. Most of them are linked, and they're funny and heartbreaking. And while I don't want to copy him in any way, I do want to try to put out a book of all original pieces. So I have a concept for that. I have a cover design already for it. I have a title for it. I started it. I ditched it, but I'm going to go back and continue to work on it.
Well, that's fantastic. And this has been such a great visit. I know you and I are also members of the National Society of Newspaper Columnists, where we've met and became friends. And
Yes.
it's just been such a pleasure to have you, John.
Well, it's been so nice of you to invite me to come, and it's so great to see you. We haven't seen each other in person in many years, so you look dapper and charming as always.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to the audience for joining us today. And we'll see you the next time on It's All Right with Suzette. Happy reading and writing, everybody.